The cold wind swept across the military shooting range as a group of young Navy SEALs laughed near the training benches. Their laughter echoed over the sound of distant gunfire. Sharp, confident, unbothered, at the far end of the range stood a thin, ragged man in torn clothes and worn-out boots. His hair was grey, his face shadowed by years of hardship. He was clutching an old, rusty sniper rifle, one that looked more like a relic than a weapon. "Hey, old man," one SEAL shouted, smirking. "That thing even fire anymore?" The others laughed. The veteran didn't respond. He simply adjusted the cracked scope, lay prone on the dusty ground, and exhaled slowly. 2 miles away, 5,000 meters, a small target shimmered in the heat haze. The SEALs shook their heads, still laughing. As the man's finger tightened on the trigger, then came a single echoing shot. A silence followed. A few seconds later, the distant target dropped cleanly, dead center, and standing just behind them, watching through binoculars, was Admiral Grant Wallace, the highest-ranking officer on base. His voice cut through the stunned quiet. "Who trained you, son?" The homeless man slowly looked up, eyes steady. "You did, sir. Once upon a time." The city woke slowly that morning, grey skies hanging low, the streets damp from a light rain that smelled faintly of metal and smoke. On the edge of downtown, near an old naval base that had seen better days, sat a small junkyard and a row of abandoned warehouses. It was there that Jack Harris lived, or rather, survived. His makeshift shelter was a corner of rusted sheet metal, tarps and broken pallets tucked behind a chain-link fence. Every morning, Jack would wake before dawn, not because he wanted to, but because old soldiers never truly stopped hearing reveille in their bones. He would wash his face in a cracked basin, comb his graying hair with military precision, and then sling an old duffel bag over his shoulder, one patched with a faded emblem, USMC Recon, 2nd Battalion. Inside that bag was his entire life. A few photos, a dented tin mug, and a weapon wrapped in an oil-stained cloth, his old sniper rifle, an M40A5 he had carried through more wars than he cared to remember. The rifle's once black body was now dull with age, the stock scarred, the scope cracked down one side. It looked useless. But Jack kept it cleaned, cared for, like a relic of a life he could never return to. Every day, Jack wandered toward the base perimeter. It wasn't officially open to the public, but no one stopped him anymore. The guards knew him. Some nodded. Some avoided eye contact. They'd heard rumors that he was a veteran, that he'd saved lives, that he'd gone mad after something terrible overseas. No one really knew the truth. Jack preferred it that way. Sometimes he picked up scrap metal from the yard near the firing range and sold it for a few dollars at the pawn shop. Other times he simply sat near the edge of the shooting field, watching through the fence as the young Navy SEAL recruits practiced. They were loud, confident, full of energy. They reminded him of his younger self, before the nightmares, before the missions that tore holes through his soul. He'd watch them calibrate their rifles, correct their stances, and argue over who had the tighter grouping. Every shot that echoed across the field made his muscles tighten, his breathing steady, as if part of him was still out there behind the trigger, feeling the wind on his cheek and the weight of duty pressing down on his heart. But no one watching those soldiers ever looked at him twice. To them, he was invisible, a shadow in torn boots and a frayed coat. One morning, as he rummaged through a pile of scrap for usable brass casings, he heard laughter drifting over the range fence. "Hey, look at that guy," one of the recruits said, his voice dripping with amusement. Jack glanced up. 3 young SEALs were watching him, smirking. "Think he's collecting souvenirs from our spent rounds," another joked. "Probably thinks he can sell them for a beer." Jack said nothing. He simply straightened, gave a brief nod, and turned back to his work. He had heard worse before, and from men with far more venom in their voices. But as he turned, one of the recruits noticed the worn rifle case slung over Jack's back. The laughter grew louder. "Oh, wait a second," the tallest one said. "Is that a rifle? Don't tell me the old-timer thinks he's a sniper." Jack's hands froze for a moment. He didn't answer. He just kept walking. Slow, deliberate, calm. The laughter chased him down the path like a cruel echo. Later that evening, when the sun dipped low and the sky bled orange and gold, Jack sat by a small fire behind the fence line, cleaning the old rifle. His fingers moved with practiced care, disassembling the bolt, wiping each piece, checking the scope alignment even though the glass was cracked. His eyes softened as he looked at the weapon. It wasn't just metal to him, it was memory. It was the only thing that still connected him to the man he once was. He whispered under his breath, words from an old Marine's creed. "This is my rifle. There are many like it, but this one is mine." The flames flickered across his face, revealing the scars, not of injury, but of exhaustion, the kind that years of silence carve into a man's soul. Inside his pocket, folded neatly, was a letter he'd never mailed. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded. It was addressed to Captain Grant Wallace. He had written it years ago, the night after the mission that ended his career, the night he lost his team in the Valley of Karangal. In it, he had tried to explain what happened, how he missed the radio call, how he made the shot too late, how the explosion that followed left him alive when everyone else wasn't. He had never sent it. He couldn't. How do you explain to your commanding officer that you survived when better men didn't? The next morning, the laughter returned, but this time louder. Jack approached the fence again, rifle in hand. The SEALs were already there, cleaning their weapons after a training session. One of them, a broad-shouldered man named Ryan Coulter, pointed at Jack and grinned. "Hey, look who's back, the ghost sniper!" Jack said nothing. He simply laid the rifle case down and unzipped it, pulling out the old weapon. The young soldiers exchanged glances, amused. "Tell you what," Ryan said, "hit the target out there, 5,000 meters, and we'll buy you dinner. Miss it and you stop stalking the range." The others laughed. Jack's eyes met Ryan's, calm, tired, but steady. He nodded once. "Deal." The laughter quieted a bit. Something in his voice didn't match his clothes. It carried authority, the kind that didn't need to shout. He walked toward the firing line, laid down on the ground and set up his rifle. The SEALs watched, whispering jokes under their breath. That's when a new voice cut through the noise, deep, commanding, familiar. Who gave permission for this circus? Every head turned. Standing behind them was Admiral Grant Wallace, the same man whose name was still written on that unsent letter in Jack's pocket. And in that moment, without a word between them, both men recognized the other. The sun rose sharp and clear over Fort Huxley Naval Range, turning the dew on the grass into glittering beads of gold. By 700 hours, the firing line was already alive with the mechanical rhythm of precision, bolts clicking, safeties disengaging, brisk casings clinking against the gravel. The air smelled of oil, gunpowder, and confidence. A line of Navy SEAL trainees, the best and the boldest of their class, stood under the watchful eye of Admiral Grant Wallace, a man known for two things, discipline and silence. He was a legend in his own right, a man who had led countless special ops in his youth, now tasked with shaping the next generation of warriors. He moved along the line of soldiers like a shadow, inspecting stances, posture, breathing. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried weight. "A rifle doesn't lie, gentlemen," he said, his voice steady as he paced. "If your hands tremble, it knows. If your mind wavers, it knows. You don't control the weapon. You earn its trust." The recruits nodded, trying to appear serious. But beneath the discipline, they were young, barely men, full of pride and untested arrogance. At the far end of the range, near the chain-link fence, a familiar silhouette stood watching. The same gray-haired man with the weathered rifle case slung over his shoulder, Jack Harris. He wasn't inside the base. He simply leaned against a utility pole just beyond the fence line, quietly observing the drills, as he often did. One of the younger SEALs, Ryan Coulter, spotted him and grinned. "Hey, fellas. Our audience is back," he muttered. The others followed his gaze. Laughter rippled down the line. "Man, that guy's always hanging around. Think he's writing a book or something? More like collecting empty shells to sell," another quipped. "Or maybe he's hoping we'll hire him as a janitor." Their snickering drew a sharp look from Lieutenant Brooks, the range supervisor. "Eyes forward!" he barked. "You're here to shoot, not to gossip." The laughter faded, but not for long. When Brooks turned away, Ryan lowered his voice. "Bet I could hit that 5,000 meter. Target faster than that old guy could hit one at 50. Maybe. He doesn't even know which end of the rifle is." Which, another chuckled. Jack had heard every word. He had the kind of hearing honed by years of silence, the kind that notices every breath, every heartbeat. He didn't move at first. But when one of the recruits lobbed an empty casing in his direction, something in him stirred. Not anger, but an old instinct. He stepped closer to the fence. His voice, though quiet, carried like a command. "You boys shoot with your mouths more than your rifles." The group froze for a moment, startled. Then Ryan laughed a touch too loud. "Oh, we've got a talker now. You some kind of sniper, old man?" Jack's expression didn't change. Once. That one word made Ryan blink. "Once, huh? Sure you were." "And I was the president." More laughter. Jack set down his bag and unzipped it slowly, revealing the battered rifle inside. The laughter grew louder. "That thing's a museum piece!" One recruit shouted. "You plan to scare the target to death?" Ryan, emboldened by the others, walked up to the fence. "You know what, old-timer? Let's make this interesting." He gestured toward the far end of the range, where the 5,000-meter target shimmered faintly in the haze. "See that? That's 5,000 meters. Nobody here's hit it clean yet. You manage that. I'll buy you a steak dinner. You miss, you stop hanging around here like a ghost. Deal?" Jack studied the young man's face. Arrogant, cocky, but not cruel. Just young. He gave a slow nod. "Deal." The recruits exchanged amused glances. This was going to be fun. Ryan tossed a cartridge over the fence. A standard issue round. Nothing special. "Let's see what the legend can do." Jack caught it with a steady hand, examined it and quietly loaded it into the chamber. He didn't boast. He didn't explain. He just lowered himself to the ground. Slow, deliberate, every motion smooth like muscle memory returning home. As he adjusted his position, the SEALs noticed something. His posture was textbook perfect. Left elbow locked under the stock, cheek pressed lightly against the comb, breathing steady and measured. Not shaky, not clumsy, professional. The laughter started to fade. By now, several other instructors had noticed the commotion. One went to fetch Admiral Wallace, who was reviewing reports in the control tower. "What's the noise about?" the Admiral asked, stepping out. "Sir, the trainees challenged a civilian," the instructor said hesitantly. "A homeless vet who hangs around the fence." Wallace frowned. "A veteran?" He stepped to the railing overlooking the range, binoculars in hand. Below, Jack Harris lay prone in the dirt, perfectly still. The only movement was the slight rise and fall of his chest as he controlled his breathing. He adjusted the cracked scope, compensating instinctively for wind drift, mirage, and bullet drop. Calculations his mind still performed effortlessly after all these years. The young SEALs snickered one last time. "Come on, Grandpa." "Any day now." Jack exhaled slowly. Wind 2 knots left. Humidity 38. Range confirmed. He wasn't speaking to them. He was whispering to himself, the way he used to before a mission. Then came the shot. Bang. The sound echoed across the range. Time seemed to stop. Seconds stretched. Then ping! The metallic sound of impact came faintly from the distant target. The spotter raised his scope, eyes wide. "Sir, direct hit. Dead center." The laughter died completely. Every head turned toward the old man lying in the dirt, his rifle still smoking. Admiral Wallace lowered his binoculars slowly. His expression had gone pale. He whispered, almost to himself, "No one outside my old unit ever made that shot." He handed the binoculars back to the instructor and began walking fast toward the fence. The recruits straightened up, uneasy now. Ryan swallowed hard, color draining from his face. When Wallace reached the firing line, he stopped a few feet from the fence, eyes locked on Jack. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he demanded. Jack rose to his feet, brushing dust from his sleeves. His gaze met the Admiral's, steady and calm. "You taught me, sir." A stunned silence fell. The Admiral's eyes widened as recognition flickered, faint at first, then burning bright. "Jack." "Harris," he whispered. And in that instant the past, thought buried and gone, came rushing back like a flood. A heavy silence blanketed the firing range, the kind that follows revelation, when the air itself feels unsure what to do next. The SEAL recruits, moments ago laughing, now stood frozen, eyes darting between the old man and the Admiral. The echo of the gunshot still lingered faintly in the distance, hanging like a ghost. Admiral Grant Wallace took a slow step forward, his gaze locked on Jack Harris. For a moment, he didn't see the tattered coat, the graying beard, or the dirt-streaked hands. He saw a younger man, a Marine in desert camouflage, eyes sharp as a hawk, steady behind a sniper scope in the chaos of war. "Harris. Jack Harris," Wallace repeated softly, almost as if testing reality. "I thought you were dead." Jack didn't smile. He simply nodded once, his voice quiet even. "Almost was, sir." The recruits looked between them, confused. Ryan finally broke the silence. "Wait, you know this guy?" Wallace didn't answer him. His eyes never left Jack. "You made that 5,000-meter shot with a cracked scope and corroded barrel." Jack nodded again. "The glass doesn't make the shot. The man does." That line hit the air like a hammer. The recruits shifted uncomfortably. The truth in his words was undeniable, and somehow they all felt it. Admiral Wallace gestured for the nearby guards to lower the fence gate. "Let him in," he ordered. The recruit stepped back as the gate swung open with a metallic groan. Jack walked through slowly, his movements calm but heavy, the way a man walks into a place he never thought he'd see again. When he reached the Admiral, the two men stood face to face. Decades of silence and memory hung between them. "Last I heard," Wallace said, "your unit was lost in Karangal Valley. The report said you never made it out." "I did," Jack replied. His voice didn't waver, but there was pain in his eyes. "But I left more of myself there than I brought back." The Admiral lowered his gaze for a moment, the weight of those words settling on him. The trainees exchanged uneasy glances, the laughter that once filled the air, now replaced by a deep, humbling respect. "Sir," Ryan began hesitantly, "we didn't know—" Wallace cut him off sharply. "No, you didn't, and that's the problem. You boys are trained to fight, but you forget the price of the fight." Ryan looked down, shame creeping into his face. The Admiral turned back to Jack. 5,000 meters, he said quietly. "That's beyond the range of most modern rifles, even with perfect optics. How in God's name did you do that with that relic?" Jack gave a faint shrug, almost humble. "Same way I did it back then. Wind steady from the east, about 2 knots. Mirage shift at 1200. Humidity's low, so the bullet won't drift. I aimed 3 inches off the shadow, let my breathing do the rest." His explanation was casual, effortless, as if he were describing how to tie a bootlace. Wallace studied him in silence. And then, for the first time in years, the hardened Admiral smiled. "You still calculate like a computer." "Harris," Jack glanced toward the distant target, "you never forget what keeps you alive." "Sir," Wallace turned to the recruits, his voice sharp again, "you boys think skill is about muscle and gadgets. You think discipline is a word on a poster. That man," he pointed at Jack, "was once the best sniper I ever trained, one of the finest in the Corps. He doesn't need night vision, laser rangefinders, or fancy scopes. He needs only this." He tapped his temple. "And this." He placed a hand over his heart. The recruits stood silent, guilt and awe etched on their faces. "We mocked him, sir," Ryan admitted quietly. "We didn't know." "No," Wallace said. "But you should have known respect when you saw it." He turned back to Jack. "You still got one more shot in you?" Jack blinked, surprised. "One more?" "I want you to show them it wasn't luck. Use their equipment." Ryan hesitated, then stepped forward, handing Jack his state-of-the-art sniper rifle, sleek, polished, equipped with a digital scope. Jack took it, feeling its balance, checking the weight. He lay down again, this time inside the range. His hands moved with the grace of a man returning to his natural element. "Spotter ready?" he asked. The spotter, A recruit who hadn't dared to mock him earlier swallowed hard and said, "Already!" "Target 5,000. Wind correction, 0.3 mils left." Jack inhaled deeply. Time slowed. The world narrowed to the sound of his breath, the faint whistle of the wind, and the faraway shimmer of a steel plate. Then, bang! The recoil jolted his shoulder slightly. The spotter froze, then gasped, "Dead center, sir!" Again, perfect hit. The range erupted in silence. Not applause, not shouting, just stunned disbelief. Jack stood, setting the rifle down gently. He didn't look proud, he looked peaceful. Admiral Wallace nodded slowly. "You've still got it." "And then some." Ryan stepped forward, removing his cap. "Sir, I'm sorry. We shouldn't have mocked you." Jack gave a faint smile. "You're soldiers. You've got spirit. Just remember, the moment you think you've got nothing left to learn, you stop being a soldier." The recruits nodded. Their arrogance melted into reverence. Wallace placed a firm hand on Jack's shoulder. "You don't belong out there on the streets, Harris. You belong here, teaching men like these what the word discipline really means." Jack hesitated, emotion flickering behind his eyes. "I'm not sure I belong anywhere anymore." "Sir, you do now," Wallace said firmly. "If you'll have it." Jack glanced down at the rifle, then at the Admiral's face, the same face that had once sent him into the fiercest battles of his life. And for the first time in years, Jack Harris nodded, not as a broken man, but as a Marine again. As he walked off the line with Admiral Wallace, the young SEALs stood in quiet formation, watching him go. Their earlier laughter was gone, replaced by silent salutes, not ordered, but earned. The Admiral's voice broke the silence one last time. "Gentlemen, remember this day. You witnessed a shot few will ever believe. But what matters isn't the shot, it's the man behind it." Jack glanced back once more at the target shimmering in the distance, his voice barely a whisper. 5,000 meters. Still feels like home. The recruits had returned to their quarters, silent and thoughtful, while the sun dipped behind the mountains that framed the base. The golden light bled across the training range, painting everything in hues of orange and sorrow. Admiral Grant Wallace stood by the observation deck, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the distant steel plate that still bore the mark of Jack's impossible shot. His reflection in the glass looked older than usual, not just in years, but in burden. Behind him, the quiet shuffle of boots echoed on the concrete. Jack Harris approached slowly, still wearing the faded coat he had arrived in. The wind tugged gently at the frayed sleeves. Wallace turned, his expression a mixture of disbelief and guilt. "Jack, I still can't believe it's really you." Jack managed a faint smile. "Believe it, sir. Though sometimes I don't either." They stood in silence for a moment, two soldiers bound by years and ghosts. Wallace gestured toward a bench by the rail, and they sat. The Admiral's posture was still proud, but his voice softened. "I read the report a dozen times back then. Your unit was ambushed, pinned down. You were marked as KIA. I even wrote a letter to your mother myself." Jack looked down, hands clasped. His knuckles were scarred, the skin roughened by years of cold nights and cheap labor. "She passed a year later," he said quietly. "Never knew I made it out." Wallace's chest tightened. "Jack, why didn't you come back?" "You could have..." Jack cut him off gently. "Come back to what, sir?" "My team was gone. My home didn't feel like home anymore. Every face I saw on the street looked at me like a ghost. The war took them, but it also took me. I just didn't die the same way." The Admiral's throat tightened. He'd heard stories of veterans losing their way, but to hear it from a man like Jack Harris, once one of his finest snipers, hit harder than any bullet could. Jack leaned forward, staring at the firing range below. "You know, when you're out there, it's simple. Breathe, aim, protect the man beside you. Every mission has a purpose. But when you come back, the noise doesn't stop. It just moves inside your head. And the world, it forgets fast." Wallace felt a pang of shame. He had given speeches about patriotism, about remembering those who served, but here sat living proof of how hollow those words could become when the system failed. "Jack," Wallace said softly, "I should have looked for you." Jack shook his head. "You were fighting your own wars, sir." Paperwork, politics, new recruits. I don't blame you. I just stopped blaming anyone, except maybe myself. A gust of wind carried across the deck, whispering through the flagpoles nearby. The sound of a distant bugle echoed, the evening call. Both men instinctively stood and faced the flag, saluting as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon. When it was over, neither spoke for a long time. Wallace finally broke the silence. You know, when I saw you today, holding that old rifle, hitting a 5,000-meter shot with it, I realized something. You never lost it. The skill, the focus, the heart. What you lost was your place in a world that stopped understanding men like you. Jack turned to him slowly, his eyes moist but steady. Maybe, but that doesn't mean I can't help others find theirs. Wallace nodded. Understanding dawning. That's exactly what I was going to say. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Inside were training rosters, clearance passes, and a transfer authorization form. He placed it on the bench between them. This program, Operation Phoenix, we're building a mentorship initiative for returning veterans. They need someone who's been through the fire and come out breathing. Someone real. Someone like you. Jack stared at the papers, stunned. You'd trust me with that? I'd only trust you with that. Jack's eyes glistened. For years, he had wandered the streets invisible, a forgotten warrior in a nation that no longer saw him. Now sitting under the setting sun with the man who once commanded him, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Jack nodded slowly. If I do this, I don't want pity. And I don't want charity. You won't get either, Wallace replied. You'll get respect, and the same way you've always done it. Jack reached for the folder, his hand trembling slightly as he signed the line at the bottom. Wallace smiled faintly. Welcome back, Sergeant Harris. Jack looked up at him. For the first time, truly seeing the man, not the rank. Feels strange hearing that again. Sir, feels right, Wallace said. It always did. As they walked back toward the barracks, the night air grew colder, but Jack didn't feel it. For the first time in years, his steps were steady. The weight on his shoulders hadn't vanished. It had simply found direction. Behind them, the lights of the firing range flickered off one by one, until only the far target remained faintly visible under the moonlight. Wallace glanced over his shoulder and murmured, "That shot. It wasn't about distance, was it?" Jack smiled faintly. "No, sir. It was about finding aim again." The morning sun rose over the training compound, its light washing the steel and sand in soft gold. The crisp sound of boots hitting gravel echoed through the grounds as a new class of recruits lined up at the firing range. But this time, the man standing at the instructor's podium was not a Navy SEAL, nor a decorated officer. It was Jack Harris, his posture straight, his expression calm. The same man who had once walked these grounds as a ghost. He wore a clean training uniform now, the name patch reading Harris. The transformation was subtle but profound. The wrinkles were still there, the eyes still carried years of sorrow, but now they held something else too. Conviction. "Good morning, recruits," Jack began, his voice even but commanding. The group responded with scattered murmurs, unsure of the man before them. Word had spread about the homeless veteran who outshot the SEALs, but few knew the full story. Jack paced slowly in front of them, his boots steady. "I'm not here to teach you how to shoot straight. I'm here to teach you why you should never miss." The recruits glanced at one another, puzzled. Jack stopped, turned, and looked each of them in the eye. "You'll be trained to fight, to endure, to survive. But someday, when the war ends and the battlefield gets quiet, that's when the real test begins. When it's just you and your memories. That's when you find out what kind of soldier you really are." The range went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. "I failed that test once," Jack continued. "And I don't want any of you to fail it too." The young men straightened unconsciously, something in his voice demanding not obedience, but respect. Over the next few weeks, Jack became a fixture at the base. He ate with the recruits, listened to their stories, and trained them with quiet precision. He didn't bark orders or demand perfection. Instead, he taught through example, showing how to find calm under pressure, how to breathe before every decision, and how to steady one's mind before pulling any trigger, literal or metaphorical. Some nights, when the range lights dimmed, Jack would sit with a few of the younger soldiers by the fire pit. He spoke little about himself, but when he did, they listened in awe. "You're not just fighting for your country," he told them one night. "You're fighting for the man beside you, and for the man you'll have to face in the mirror years from now." That sentence stuck with every recruit who heard it. Admiral Wallace often watched from afar, hands behind his back, pride swelling in his chest. Operation Phoenix, the mentorship program they'd created together, had grown faster than either expected. Veterans who had been adrift were returning to train others, to share their stories, and to rebuild what war had taken from them. They came with scars, physical and unseen, but under Jack's guidance, they found meaning again. In one of the program's sessions, a young veteran named Ortiz broke down mid-training. Trembling as memories of combat flooded his mind, Jack knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "You're not weak," he said softly. "You're human. The strong ones aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who keep standing after they do." Ortiz nodded, tears streaking his cheeks. From that day, he followed Jack like a shadow. Word spread. The man once mocked by SEALs had become a symbol of strength, not through force, but through resilience. One quiet afternoon, Admiral Wallace entered Jack's modest office. The walls were simple: a few training certificates, a map of past missions, and a photo of his old unit. The men lost in Karangal Valley. Wallace placed a sealed envelope on his desk. Command approved the funding. "You're officially the lead instructor for Phoenix West, a permanent facility built in your name." Jack looked up, stunned. "In my name? You earned it, Sergeant. You gave us back something we didn't even know we'd lost." For a long moment, Jack said nothing. His eyes lingered on the photo of his fallen brothers. Then slowly a faint smile crossed his face. "They'd like that," he said quietly. "They'd like knowing it meant something." Later that night, Jack walked out to the range alone. The moon hung high, casting silver light over the distant targets. He carried his old, battered rifle, the same one that had brought him here. Setting it on the bench, he looked through the cracked scope one last time. He whispered under his breath, "For you, boys. Every one of you." He steadied his breath and took one slow shot into the darkness. The bullet found its mark. Distant, invisible, but true, and when the echo faded, Jack Harris finally exhaled the weight of years. The next morning, the recruits gathered again. Jack stood before them in his uniform, shoulders squared, eyes bright with quiet pride. "This isn't about where you start," he told them. "It's about what you do when you're given a second chance." He paused, glancing toward the horizon, where the mountains met the sky. "I was given one. Don't waste yours." Behind him, a new banner fluttered in the wind. Phoenix Training Initiative, Honor Through Rebirth. Admiral Wallace stood watching from the sidelines, a hand resting over his chest. For the first time in years, he felt something powerful stir within him. Not pride in medals or ranks, but in redemption itself. As the recruits took their first training shots of the day, the echo rolled across the valley like thunder. Jack watched them silently, then looked toward the target far beyond the range, the one he alone could see. A faint smile touched his lips. "Still steady," he whispered. "Still home." The camera would slowly pull back, the veteran standing tall against the rising sun, his shadow long and unwavering, a symbol of every lost soldier who found his way back to purpose, a warrior reborn.